Going to law school, I realized how often I actually broke the law.
I mean, that stems from just a long history of politicians and the government lying to everybody. If you ask somebody to talk about what a politician is, it's somebody who lies to everybody.
There is something that's absolutely rebellious about criminal defense and fighting back against the state. That's part of it that I really love.
We as a society, I don't think we're headed towards a utopia. We're headed towards all being poor.
So welcome to the Defensible podcast. I'm Chris Kane, your host, and this is where we talk about criminal defense and the state of the law. Today I have two guests with me. I have Breeden and Brett Hartman. They're both criminal defense attorneys from Monterey County, so thank you both for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me.
Aaron, I'm going to take away that phone if you're staring at it the whole time.
No, I'm not going to stare at it the whole time.
So
I can multitask. That's how good I am.
I do that in court too.
Yeah.
It's going to suck the air out of the room if we don't talk about it. I think we need to talk about.
Oh, dude, let's not go there.
You don't want to talk about the.
I think if we start talking about that, I'll say something that will probably get me disbarred.
Well, then let's skip over.
I mean, if you want to go there, we can go there. But I've already been ranting and I'm not ranting, but if you want to go there, we can go there.
All I'll say is that I spoke with two people, one of them, Eddie, and they both expressed some disbelief. And my thoughts on that are my thoughts with when the media came out saying that there has been extraterrestrial contact. And I believed in aliens and I believed that they were hiding something at Area 51 until they told me that they were. And now I think they're lying about it. So that says something about where we are with our country and how we view our government, that we don't really believe anything, right? What's actually real? What bullshit are they feeding us now? So that's there's a disbelief, just incredulity towards.
Yeah, well, and I mean, that stems from just a long history of politicians and the government lying to everybody. I mean, that's what you get. Basically, I mean, if you ask somebody to talk about what a politician is, it's somebody who lies to everybody and tries to get everyone, tries to give everyone a smile, and
so they can get rich while they're getting rich,
more or powerful. Yeah, either way.
Well, they say that about lawyers too, though.
I don't know about that.
So let's talk about being lawyers. You guys are both criminal defense attorneys. Brett, let's start with you. How did you get into it? Did you always want to be a public defender? Or?
I think I wanted to be a public defender, but I just didn't think it was really possible, right? So my parents both worked. My mom and my stepdad both worked full time. My dad worked full time, but we were lower middle class, right? We just didn't have the money, right? And so I never thought law school was possible. I went to UC San Diego and got my bachelor's degree, and I thought I wanted to be a lawyer, but I just didn't think it was really possible, because of the money. And then I ended up moving back here to Monterey County. I was working for my stepdad, and while I was working for him, I heard an ad for Monterey College of Law. In good old Monterey College of Law, the tuition was about a third the cost of tuition for any other law school. And I was like, I can actually do this. I think I wanted to be a criminal defense attorney or a public defender. And for some reason, I had it in my mind that, well, they're not going to hire, a lowly Monterey College of Law grad. And the other part too was I needed income. So I was doing the job I was doing. I worked in law school. I worked for a firm that did workers' compensation as a paralegal. I worked there for about 4 years. And as soon as I passed the bar, they're like, here's a job as a lawyer. So I felt very comfortable in that. And it wasn't until I was really unhappy, deeply, deeply unhappy doing that. And I got, there was an ad for a criminal defense firm in town that was hiring for an associate. And I was like, this is perfect. So I applied for that. I took that job. I did that for about 2.5 years. And then I got approached by someone in the public defender's office asking me to apply. And I did. And then I got that. And I've been a public defender for about the last 2 years. And it's the best job in the world.
Nice.
The best job in the world. Yeah.
When you were doing workers' comp, did you actually get litigation experience? I've been in there, and there's a little tiny courtroom and the judge is right there. You're as close as you and I are to the judge, which is different. But what was that like? I got
a ton of litigation experience. So when I was working on the defense side for the large corporations and insurance companies. That was who my clients were.
Yeah.
That's part of why I was deeply unhappy about it.
That's one of the things I love the most about Brett too, is this hypocritical nature of how he will work for evil corporations, support Jeff Bezos, and then rail against
absolutely
the same corporations that he funds.
Absolutely. And so, and I need to earn a living, so I took a job that I could find, but tons of litigation experience. I probably did 100 depositions in about 2.5 years as a lawyer there. I litigated cases all the way through trial and appeal. Actually, within my first month of being a lawyer, I had a case that went to a trial, which is kind of just like an evidentiary hearing in the workers' comp world. Evidentiary hearing with this judge in Southern California who was a spitting image of Sam Elliott. He just straight up was Sam Elliott. And I walk into his courtroom, his courtroom is just the same as the attorney conference room, and it's just one room. This is this administrative law judge,
right?
And you walk in, and it's Sam Elliott sitting there, and he's telling you, you're not doing anything in my courtroom, right? Like, I'm telling you what's up. And he was trying to put me in check and was trying to just completely push me over. And I stood my ground. And by the end of it, he was like, all right, I'm going to rule against you, but I think I'm wrong. So if you appeal it and I'm wrong, just know that. And I was like, okay. So then I immediately filed an appeal. The appellate, court overturned it. There's like a published case, but that was like within my first month of being a lawyer. So I got tons of litigation experience doing that. And it really helped me be comfortable with things like cross-examination, and also cross-examining like expert witnesses. I did a lot of depositions of doctors and stuff that I think those skills were super helpful when I became a criminal defense lawyer. Just feeling confident doing it.
Right.
Just having done it before gives you the confidence that you can do it again. And so even though I did not feel happy and I felt deeply unfulfilled doing that work, there's some positives from it. What
about you, Aaron? How'd you get here?
I was a criminal.
Yeah.
Growing up as a kid, I was a total criminal. I was delinquent. I mean, like, there was no real like violence, which isn't entirely true because I did commit violence, occasionally, but I
justified.
I never got arrested for a real violent crime. I was always drunk or drugs, stuff like vandalism. And so I had a lot of experience with the criminal justice system, went to county jail as a kid. And so I had a lot of experience, like I said, with the criminal justice system. And getting my Fourth Amendment, getting rights squashed, where I was like, man, that can't be right. Like, what do you mean you have the right to do that? Like, wait a minute, but not knowing that they're violating my rights, but like inherently knowing, like, this doesn't seem right. But I was actually a caddy I started as a golf caddy in 2002 when I was like 25, and I caddied for years and years. And then finally I just got bored and I was like, I got to find something else to do. And I was like, well, maybe I'll go to law school. And that's what I did. But I don't like homework, and I don't like paperwork. And I just want to like argue with people. And I want stuff to be interesting, right? Like wills and trusts, probate stuff. I mean, I'd rather stab my eyes out with a screwdriver than read that stuff. So the criminal law seemed really interesting to me, right? And I actually remember there was a case. It was Dudley v. Stevens, I think it was, or Regina v. Stevens. It was a necessity defense to murder in the 1800s, where some boat, like a ship captain and a first mate, and some cabin boy were lost at sea in a boat. And the captain and the first mate ended up killing the kid and eating him and drinking his blood and all this stuff. And at the time, necessity was a defense to murder. And then the Queen of England got involved, and this case was a famous case where necessity defense was actually removed, and necessity is no longer defense to murder. But I love this case because it was super interesting, right? And they made not a martyr, but they said it made him an example, this captain and the first mate, but they ended up releasing him. because it was well documented history that when you're lost at sea, the weakest one goes down in order to save the rest. Like this had gone on. And so I just kind of love criminal defense. And so when I was in law school, I didn't have any experience whatsoever working in any law firms or anything. I caddied my way through school. And then when I got out, I was doing all these like mishmash stuff. And I ended up getting a job with the public defender in their drug treatment courts. And so I actually really liked the public defender. I was actually a volunteer attorney with the PD before.
Right.
So I was volunteering and I was in arraignment court and I was doing all this stuff. I wasn't getting paid. And there wasn't a lot of motion work. There wasn't that much paperwork. There wasn't that much homework to do. I mean, really, there is, but mostly it's like negotiating things, talking to your clients, like, look, these are the facts they need to prove, probably be able to prove it, and also recognizing that from a client standpoint, like I understand what you're going through, right? Like I understand, like the thing about criminal defense is I understand where my clients are at. Like I understand how they got there, right? And so I felt unique in a unique position to help my clients because I understand how to get myself out of trouble. And so there are certain things I can do to get myself out of trouble, go to meetings, do this, do that. The judge and the DA like this sort of thing. It makes you look better. It actually does benefit you too. And usually you get yourself kind of out of a jam. And so that's kind of where I was at. And also I never was really that interested in anything really super heavy. I'm not a pedophile. I'm not a murderer. So, those were a little bit above my pay grade. And so that's why I've always sort of been really interested in criminal defense, but sort of more like, people like me, my people, yeah, I'm drunk, yeah, I know what it's like to drive a car drunk, let's figure out how to get you out of this. And also, help people and also, yeah, just civil law is awful.
It is.
It's awful. Like civil attorneys, I have a civil case right now. It's actually not a civil case. It's a criminal case. It's a traffic infraction. It's a criminal case. And I'm dealing with a civil attorney and I don't want to deal with civil attorneys. I don't want to deal with civil law. I don't want to deal with civil court clerks. I just don't want to deal with any of that.
Right. It seems like civil law is the least civil area of the law.
It's just, they're all billing, they're all being obstructionists in order to generate their own fees. And I just don't want to deal with that. Like let's put this thing to bed and move on. And so that's why I was always generated to went towards criminal law. And I was the opposite. Like public defense, Monterey College Law is a great college for this area. You have the head PD is a Monterey College Law graduate. You have at least 3 or 4 judges in our court that are Monterey College Law graduates, including I think the presiding judge. I think the PJ actually went to Monterey College Law. I think Judge Butler is an MCL graduate. Don't quote me on that.
Halsey is.
Halsey, I know she is, and or they taught there. And so you have and same with the DA. One of the head DAs was my evidence was my criminal law procedure professor, and so I always really like criminal law. I find it interesting, and it's less petty. I mean, I find the government fairly petty sometimes, but it's not people like being petty. You're barbecuing chicken, I'm going to sue you, or I'm going to plant some trees on your property line to obstruct your view. I mean, stuff like that.
Sounds a little personal on that last one there.
Yeah, right.
I had that barbecue case where one neighbor sued the other because they complained about the smoke coming out of the Weber. Yeah,
and apparently though that party, the plaintiff is actually suing their other neighbor now.
Yeah.
And I mean, and it's like, fuck you. I'd rather just shoot you and burn your house down. But we live in this civilized society now where you can't do that sort of stuff, so you get buried under litigation. But
to be clear, you can't do that.
You cannot do that.
Don't do that.
As a lawyer and going to law school, I realized how often I actually broke the law.
Yeah. You know what you said about those are my people. I was the worst driver. I had a Mustang when I was 16. I was speeding and got my license suspended a bunch of times. DUIs, all that stuff. So those are my people. My ideal clients are young guys, Camaros, Mustangs, their little Scat Pack, charged, whatever. And those guys doing donuts, I've done so many donuts. I know what that's like. So I totally get it. I kind of resonate with a large share of my clients.
They're knuckleheads.
What's really interesting is like, I'm such a rule follower. Like I am a meticulous rule follower throughout school. Like I never got in trouble. I was like total straight arrow. And it's interesting because like I have clients like that are charged with reckless driving or doing, or clients that just get pulled over all the time. And I'm looking at them. It's harder for me to relate. And it's interesting because I wasn't that person.
Yeah.
So for me, it's like, buddy, you got to keep yourself out of trouble. What's going on?
I can tell you what was going on for me. I was always trying to stick it to the man. I had a real problem with authority. And then at some point, maybe I started paying taxes. Like I became a man, and I had to let go of that rebellious part of me, but I still am able to do it in the courtroom. And you know what's funny about public defenders? I had Don Landis on the show, and he said he got into it not long after Gideon, not long after this. And he said, there's a job where the state will pay me to fight back against the state. That's the job I want. I want to be the one fighting the state. I want to be the one putting the broomstick in their spoke so they flip over and crash. Like I want to be that. I want to have that. So there is something that's absolutely rebellious about criminal defense and fighting back against the state. And that's part of it that I really love.
Well, and I've always, I say I'm straight and narrow and all that, but I heavily involved in hardcore and punk growing up as a kid. Like that's all against authority. It's all pushback. It's it's different, but it's the same sort of thing. What's interesting though, listening to Aaron, what clicked in my head with Aaron is because Aaron and I approach cases very differently. And I think part of that is because of our backgrounds. And so what I was listening to Aaron say was like, he wants to help his clients the way that he knows how he was getting himself out of trouble. And I do the same thing, which is when I have a case, my first instinct is to go to like the more academic or intellectual side of like, well, can I beat these elements in this way? Like, how can I persuade on these certain points? And Aaron's experience is the total opposite, which is like, not necessarily don't fight on that level, but more just of how to get yourself out of a jam. Like how to, and his experience with how to get out of that is way different from me. Me was like, try to overthink the other side. And his approach was just a little bit more grounded in reality, a little bit more like practical, right? Like,
Aaron, I read your briefing on one of your recent cases. It's definitely intellectual. I mean,
for sure. It's not. I'm not saying it's not intellectual, but it's just where I think Aaron, because I call Aaron all the time about cases, and he just, I'll be trying. Frankly, it's like I get a little cute with it sometimes. I try to like, well, technically, does this mean this, and argue about the words, and that's.
Yeah, is this colon in the, what does this, there's a semicolon in this sentence. What is that semicolon?
Right.
What is that? Does that change the meaning of like is it disjunctive or, I don't have time to intellectualize. I'm just not smart enough for that. I'm more like, wait a minute, was my guy drunk driving or was he sitting in his car drinking because his girlfriend's in his apartment and he's embarrassed to drink in front of her because he's a big drunk.
Right.
Like there's different, like there's different ways to look at cases. Like, and one of the reasons, and I talked to Brett because he's so on a higher level of intellectualism. It's true. And so I'll be like, hey, I need some help with the smarts of this. And then we talk to each other and like, well, wait a minute, what about the jury appeal of this? Like, hold up a second, from a jury, does this case have jury appeal? Like, how do you appeal to the jury here? How do you get the jury to say not guilty? And there are technical defenses, right? But does a jury like a technical defense? If I can give a jury like something that's more like grounded in like reality, it's like, wait a minute, I don't want to find this guy not guilty. I don't want to let this guy off on a technicality. I don't want to let the guy off because I don't think he's guilty. And so like, there's different ways to get to that not guilty.
So I think it's really important for us to be able to talk about our cases and what we're doing and talk amongst the three of us and even us with other defense attorneys.
Absolutely.
But Brett, you have a built-in system with the PDs. Aaron, do you miss having that, being a former PD and having other attorneys to bounce it off of?
Oh, well, absolutely. I love being a PD, actually. I was a public defender. It was my first job, really like real job out of law school, and I loved it. When I was a PD, it was a lot different than it is when Brett's a PD. But it wasn't that long ago. When I was a public defender, I'd initially started out in the drug court, veterans treatment court, military diversion, and DUI court. So I was in the therapeutic courts, and that really resonated with me because of my, being in recovery myself. And so that was great. And then I got hired full time because I'd been a full time I was like a
temp.
A temp. I was a full time temp. And they kicked me on. They kept me on for about a year, and then they're like, "Okay, we're going to hire you." And I got moved to Department 9. And when I was in Department 9, there were 3 district attorneys, and they were all young, and they were all trying to get their cases, so that they could get their promotions. And I was the only full time PD in that department, and then there was a floater. And so I was taking on like almost 70% of the cases. So I had like 500 open cases between the 815 calendar and then the litigation cases. And I had a newborn, and I was getting just buried. I would have like 14 calendar calls because each DA would not let go of stupid stuff. And so I'd have to do all these calendar calls, and I was dying. And I kept saying to my supervisor, who's no longer there, I'm like, I need help. And the response I got was like, you're just working too hard. And it's like, okay. I'm like, no, but I need help. You're not really doing it right.
Just ignore those clients.
You're just working too hard. Like these 815s, you don't need to do anything with those. Just go to like basically be unprepared. They weren't saying be unprepared. They were just saying you don't need to do anything about those cases until you're in the morning. And you do need to know about those cases because there's all kinds of weird stuff coming on. And I had 3 jury trials in 4 weeks, not including all the calendar calls and all the other stuff. And I was like, I loved being a PD. There's a lot of people to talk to. I like the office atmosphere. And I was just getting crushed. And I got moved up to the judge I was in front of retired. And they moved me into this felony department, and the felony judge, and it was right after COVID. And so you had all these cases that had been dragging on, and the felony judge was going against the rule of court by saying you had to have your trial briefs all filed before calendar call. And that's not what the rule of court says. Actually, the rule of court is that your trial brief must be filed Friday before trial. And he's like, nope, you need to have your briefs filed before calendar call. And I'm like, Your Honor, I'd like the court to revisit this. The DA, that gives the DA unfair advantage because I'm being forced to file trial briefs where the DA could actually not file a trial brief, walk in and dismiss. Right. And he's like, no. And so I was getting hammered. And I finally just said, I had a client who was just being totally unreasonable. And I said, you know what? I don't need this shit. And I actually walked out. And it was not a good move. It made me look really bad. It made the public defender's office and every single person involved in that look really bad. And it was not the kind of conduct that an attorney should do. And I do miss being a public defender. That being said, I do have a couple of lawyers that it's really important to be able to bounce things off of. I have a case, it's a traffic case, but it's an interesting issue. I talked to you about it, and you put me on with Mr. Landis. Talked to Don Landis about it. There's an interesting case, People v. Landis. Great issue that I probably would. I mean, maybe I would have found it, but probably not. And I get to go forward and argue that, or that happens a lot. I get Brett will turn me on to a legal issue, and I'm like, because you do need to argue the legal issues.
Right.
The legal issues are important. They're more important than the factual issues, maybe. But at the end of the day, it's the facts. It's just the facts. But I do miss being a public defender. It is important. It's good to have that built-in system. And I'm a solo practitioner. I don't have a secretary. I do it all myself, and it's a lot harder.
Yeah, but it is. I mean, it is great to be in an office where I can literally go to any attorney in my office, and I've never been shot down if I'm like, hey, can I get 5 minutes to ask you about this? Every single time, everyone will just drop. Yeah, sure, I'll drop what I'm doing. Like, let's just talk about it right now.
And you'll do it for them.
Absolutely. I love doing that. That's like probably my favorite. Well, not my favorite part of the job, but that's definitely one of the best parts of the job is just sitting and chatting and talking about stuff, because it helps you process what's going on and process your own thoughts too. There's stuff that people have come to me to ask me for help on something, and I end up saying something out loud that clicks about something else I had going on. And now I'm like, wait a minute, the thing I just said is applicable to this other thing. I'm going to use that. That's like really the job of a criminal defense attorney. Part of the execution of being a criminal defense attorney is like refining You're refining your arguments into as small of a window as possible that you can repeat in other cases, that you can modify to work in other cases, and try to just get those little nuggets of information. You can't reinvent the wheel. It's not possible. I mean, Aaron was saying he had 500 cases. I don't have that. I don't have anywhere close to that right now, but I can't reinvent the wheel on every case. And so I need to have skills that I can take and ideas I can share between cases, basically.
I think it's better not to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah,
definitely not. I don't want to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
I mean, and a lot of the briefs and a lot of the things you do are very, very formal, very standard. Hey, here's a motion to suppress, and it's real template almost.
Are either of you guys using AI?
No.
No, not yet. I have seen some attorneys use it. I actually saw one attorney, he posted an example on part of this like listserv, and
welcome to Costco. I love you.
With a bunch of different attorneys. And so one of the things he posted was he had the AI come up with a good list of cross-examination questions on a very discreet, like he fed it like a 2 or 3 sentence excerpt from the police report and got it to write cross-examination questions based on perception, and it's just all the little details that go into it. And a lot of times, and so like something like that is something I could see possibly using it for. I don't really like AI, especially because I think AI right now is doing a lot of the stuff that
people should know how to do.
Either people should know how to do, or like especially like AI with any like art of any kind is just it just strikes me as odd that we're using computers to generate art instead of using the computers to do the work so that we can do the art, So
I use ChatGPT all the time just to proofread an email before I send it. Make sure there's a period at the end of the sentence. Recently, I saw Westlaw Precision, which you can type an issue into it and it'll spit out, it'll ask you, clarify the issue, and it'll spit out cases on both sides of it that you can cite. And it's $500 a month. I'm going to buy it. No question. I'm buying that. And I think that that'll make me a better attorney. If I use it, it'll make it quicker. It'll make it better, that I'm not missing any of the cases. And I'm not afraid of it. I'm going to embrace it. And I think it's just going to help me. It's going to be expensive, but it'll help.
So I tend to, maybe it's all the LSD I took as a kid.
Maybe not enough.
But I tend to look at what I think is, maybe I'm just a big thinker, but I see a big problem developing in the horizon. And maybe it goes back to the kind of the political events of our day. But we as a society, I don't think we're headed towards a utopia. I think we're headed towards a dystopia.
Sure.
And I hear this talk of basic universal income and AI. And what I see is people not having careers anymore. And essentially being, here's your 500 units a month, and you're going to have, and so we're going to get money, and then all of our expenses will pretty much equal all of the money that we're given. Here's get 500 units. Here's your internet expense. Here's your food expense. Here's your rent expense, and you really don't have anything left over, right? So you're poor. We're headed towards all being poor, with no opportunity for advancement whatsoever. And so when people use AI, what that is that's taking somebody's job, right? It started very innocuous, self-checkouts, right? Though that was somebody's job, right? And now you have a corporation not paying somebody to do a job, but where's the benefit to the consumer? There is none. Right. And it's slowly evolving to this AI. People are like, oh, well, AI is not going to take people's jobs, but it is. It's already taking people's jobs, and people are losing their tech jobs. Right. And so I don't necessarily care if AI makes me a better lawyer. I really don't. Like, I don't need to be so busy that I need to use AI. It's kind of like one of my best friends here sitting here who hates billionaires. Well, excuse me, corporation. Yeah, he's pretty pretty
I don't know who you're talking about.
Anti, right? But yet he'll buy shit from Amazon.
Right.
I don't buy stuff from Amazon.
That mic's from Amazon.
I didn't buy it.
I did. Yeah.
So, I don't want to use AI. And also, like, am I the only one who's seen Terminator? Right? Like, technology, I'm not a big fan of it. And so it's like, I can see kind of where all of this is headed. And I don't really like it. So I'm not going to do it. No, I'm not going to do that.
Brett, are you into Warhammer?
What's that?
Warhammer?
I'm not into Warhammer, but I know what it is.
Okay, so the lore of Warhammer 40K is that it's the year 41,000,
Right,
and humanity had gone through some growing pains where they had AI, and there's an AI rebellion, and then they outlawed it. They grew past it, but it had been this huge thing that took over, and they had to fight against it, with Terminator, what have you. And they outgrew it, and then they banned it, they outlawed it, just because it had gone too far. For me, I can't fight the big picture stuff, right? Like I see all those things that you mentioned that maybe we're going in the wrong direction. But right now, for me, I'm going to use it to be the best attorney I can be. Like I don't want to miss a case. So I'm going to subscribe to Westlaw Precision so I can find all those cases and make sure I'm not overlooking them. And so I can write the best possible brief for my clients. So that's kind of my take on it. I get it that there's bigger things that are outside of our control that are probably going in the wrong direction. But for now, what can I do aside from try to use it to help people in the interim?
I mean, my perspective on a lot of that stuff too is just, I think we run into problems when we try to individualize our way out of systemic problems. You can't do that. And so like, should the government have tighter controls on AI? Probably. But if they're not, my individual choice to use or not use ChatGPT has no bearing on the dystopia that we're headed towards,
But then that absolves me of any self-responsibility or self-conduct, right? Like, so who are you going to vote for, Biden or Trump? Or you're not going to vote, right? So like, we only have two choices. So you're going to vote for one of them, right? But like, what if everybody did vote for RFK? Or what if everybody did vote for somebody else, right? Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like, where's your self-responsibility? It's like, it doesn't matter if I use 27,000 gallons of water when I water my front yard because I can't do anything systemically about a problem, right? Mm-hmm. So, why should I conserve? I don't necessarily know that I agree with that. And also, and if I don't believe in something, but yet I'm using it, then does that make me a
hypocrite?
A hypocrite?
Yeah, you want to be consistent.
You want to be consistent with your ideals and all of that. And unfortunately, it's like we do live in no man is an island, or we all are connected, interconnected. But do I go to Starbucks or do I go to the Bearded Bean?
We go to the Bearded Bean.
I go to the Bearded Bean. Why? Because fuck Starbucks. The
coffee's better.
Well, and the coffee's better.
I don't know that the coffee's better. It's all the same to me.
It's like Chevron gas versus Shell gas, right? It's all gas. They're beans. They come from South America or wherever. Maybe they're, So, and it's like that. Do you go to the local market or do you buy from Whole Foods? Do you buy garbage from Safeway, right? You don't have to buy garbage from Safeway. You can go to a farmer's market and buy vegetables, You don't have to do it. And if everybody did that, then maybe things would change. And so, I'm not going to spend my hard-earned money on AI. I'm not going to spend my hard money on ChatGPT. I'm not going to go when I go to the airport and I see an enterprise that's completely self-automated. Why would I give that business my money? There are now places you can go that are totally self-automated. Fuck that place. That was somebody's job, right? But I also, and maybe this is it, like I paid my student loans back. So I don't know. I just, the way we perceive the world is kind of how we move through it. But I'm just not going to support, I'm not going to do that. And maybe it does make things easier. My girlfriend, she used a ChatGPT. She used ChatGPT she uses it, my partner, and people use it. And it does produce good results. I guess I just do stuff the hard way.
I don't know if there's a right or wrong. You got to be the change you want to see in the world, right? Let's talk about soft skills. How do you bring around a young DA who's ambitious, who's trying to win this case and you think it's a ridiculous case? How do you talk to the DA? How do you bring them around to the reasonable point of view where they, whatever it is, you have a client who sent some nasty gram text and now they're being charged with something.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. Yeah. Someone had a case like that.
Somebody had a case like that. My style has definitely changed a little bit, and I think it's very different, especially as a public defender. My negotiation style is very much transparent in the sense that I am realistic with the DA in terms of like, what if I have a DA and they're making an offer and I don't think the offer is very good, I'll tell them that the offer is not good. But if the offer is good and my client is the one being unreasonable, then I leave it up to the client, to decide whether or not to take the offer. I'm not going to squeeze the DA on every little item for a client if that's not, if the client is the one being unreasonable, right? And I'll take my client's counteroffer to them. That's my duty. My duty is to convey the offer to the client. If they want to take it, they can take it. If they don't, if they want a counteroffer, I can make a suggestion. But typically with the DA, I tend to be more hands off, and I think that's actually true of some of the public defenders. I know the private bar spends a lot of time, and when I was private, I spent a lot of time with the DA, giving every piece of reasoning I possibly could to try to convince them one way or the other. And the reality is, I've found in my own practice is that, really the way you get the results you want is by fighting, is by setting your case for trial. I don't know how many times I've been told that your best offer is at the early resolution, at your arraignment, right? In where we practice, they'll make you an offer at your arraignment in misdemeanor cases. And I can't tell you the number of times I've been told that that's the best offer in the case, only to set the case for trial. And at the last hearing before the trial that we call the calendar call, the case gets dismissed completely, or get a screaming deal later down the line. And so I tend to be hands off, because part of it too is I think about it from the DA's perspective. And so I think about what, if I think that there's a significant issue, I don't need to beat the DA up about it, because the DA should be able to recognize that. And the DA is ultimately going to decide whether they're going to do what I want or not. And I think a lot of times, if there is a really good issue on a case, I won't tell the DA about it. Yeah. And part of the reason for that is because if either one of two things are going to happen, either they're going to see it themselves and come to a good conclusion, or they're not going to see it, and that's to my client's benefit.
Now that can come out at a suppression hearing too, right?
Yeah.
You can, and the DA can be totally blindsided, but it was in front of their face the entire time, and they should have known. And that's on them if they want to fall on their face and not do their research and be obstinate about it. And what can you do?
Yeah, I had a case recently. I won a motion to suppress evidence, which is a challenge that the initial stop. So client was charged with driving under the influence, and the initial stop was for tinted windows, which is like one of my favorite issues.
Yeah, I've got it right now.
Yeah, and
11 o'clock at night, 1 a.m.
It was super late at night, whatever. But
yeah,
but I get the case, I look at the stop. Whenever I see that as a reason for a stop, I always want to see the body camera.
Was that the guy peeing behind the fence?
It was not. That was a different guy. There was, but basically, if whenever I see that issue in a police report, I want to look at the body camera. I want to look at the M-bars. I want to look at the car and see what's the tint like, what's going on. This case, I look at the body camera, and there's the secondary officer on scene who's walking up to the other side of the car. And the passenger side front window is halfway rolled down. And you can see in his body camera, you can see straight through that window, right? There is almost no tint on that window, if there is tint on that window. And I saw that on the body camera. And my style, and this is where I might disagree with a lot of other attorneys, but my style is I don't say anything about that to the DA, because there's only two things that are going to happen. One is they're going to, if I tell them about it, what's going to happen is they're going to talk to the police officer and come up with some other reason why the car was stopped, or some other excuse, or that's basically it. That's, in my experience, that's basically it. And so either if I tell them, it's like an issue that they can either fix ahead of time or they don't fix at all. It's to my client's benefit if they don't, try to fix that.
I have a case where my guy was pulled over for swerving within his lane. And I talked to the DA about it. He's like, well, we'll have to watch the video and see if there's another reason for the stop. I was like, get the hell out of here.
Yeah. Well,
get the heck out.
And that kind of issue is also interesting because the case law is actually kind of clear on weaving within your lane.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's things that weaving within your lane is not a crime. It's not a traffic infraction.
No.
And so there are some cases that are on point, but it's the sort of issue where if you did go to the DA and you said to the DA, hey, like, this isn't a reason for the stop, like they'll try to come up with one. Basically.
Right. And I have, and I felt like I was kind of shooting myself in the foot, but at the same time, I kind of want to be on the up and up and say, look, this is your case. These are the flaws in it. Make a reasonable decision. And I have belief that they're going to make a reasonable decision. And then they say something like, well, we'll take a look. We'll see if there's another justification. It's like, man, what are you doing out here? Are you really serving justice?
Well, I think that's it right there. Are you serving justice? Because you asked, like, how do you get a young DA to come around? And so what Brett was talking about was a legal issue. And legal issues are to be determined by the judge, right? The judge determines legal issues, and then the trier of fact determines factual issues. And so when you get a young DA to come around, you got to know your DA. Some DAs aren't. Brett's in a specific department. And while that department has had different DAs come and go, he has a pretty consistent DA counterpart. So he knows who he's dealing with on any given day, right? And so when I do private work, I'm in Department 7, Department 8, Department 9. Sometimes I go upstairs to a felony case. So you got to try to know your DA, and there's all these different DAs. I tend to try to bully the DA.
Yeah.
I bully the DA. I'm 6'2". I'll stand over him. I'm loud. I can be aggressive. But I also know, I also look at a case and it's like, if you look at a case, this case is a piece of shit, or it's a piece of shit for the DA, or it's a piece of shit for your client, right? And so it's like, what am I trying to get out of it? Like, how am I helping my client the most, right? And so if I have a case that's a piece of shit for my client, I generally tell my client to, like, okay, dude, this is what you're going to do. You're going to go do some therapy.
Right.
You're going to do some community service. You're going to start doing 3 self-help meetings per week. All right. You're going to start doing all of that stuff now.
Right.
Right.
Get out ahead of it.
Get out ahead of it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to find a couple of maybe quasi-legal issues, maybe a couple factual issues that I can point out to the DA on top of, by the way, look at what everything my client's doing. And this is how this case should resolve, right? Because most cases do resolve. But I've also had cases where, I had a case, it was a great trial case. But my client was also a nurse, right? And there was a resisting arrest. It was a DUI. And she won her DMV hearing. And so what I did was I got that DA a bunch of mitigation information. Here's her college stuff. Here's her AA meetings. Here's her therapy. By the way, we want it to DMV. But I'm trying to save her nursing license, or her being able to get a nursing license. And so she doesn't have a criminal record. Actually, she actually did kind of have a criminal record, and we cleaned it all up. But if she goes down on a 148 and a DUI, it's going to screw her with the nursing board. And so I was able to get that DA to come around because, number one, I'd like to think my rep with the DA's office is I'm actually upfront. I don't hide the ball. I point out the issues, and I get mitigation information. And also I've gotten not guilties at trial. Like, I pulled some fucking rabbits out of hats at trial. And so here's what I'm talking about. And can we get this? And the DAs that I've always beaten at trial are the ones that are really stubborn and don't want to come around to the real issues. But I find that the way to get the DA, a young DA, to kind of get to where I think the case should go is to give them a bunch of mitigation information ahead of time. And by doing that, also, I poison the well. And I'm also a big fan of poisoning the well by providing all this mitigation information. I like to sit in chambers and say, Judge or DA, but look at the judge. Here's everything my client's already doing. Because what that does, I think, is subconsciously kind of turns the judge to kind of say, hey, how are we serving justice? Right. And that client, that nurse, she ended up getting a wet reckless. And they dismissed the 148, the resisting obstructing. Oh, there was a battery. There was a battery on a peace officer. And that was the big one, actually, because she had allegedly kicked the cop. Now, that cop was a huge liar, and you never saw her kick a police officer on camera. And he was just notorious. He's a CHP, and he's notorious.
We all know who you're talking about.
And the MVARs clearly showed that he was lying on multiple levels. But it saved her $5,000 in a trial cost. It got her a wet. It saved her nursing license. And and that was a fair resolution.
So how important is having a good reputation for a criminal defense attorney? A good reputation among the prosecutors in the bar?
I don't know. I'm not a DA. I mean, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah. Well, and it depends too, like what your reputation is, right? So I know some lawyers that maybe they have a reputation for being obfuscators or being sneaky or whatever. That's their perceived reputation. Not that that's what they are, but that's definitely what the prosecutors think.
Or they'll litigate like issues that really aren't worth litigating, but they'll just do it to litigate the issue.
But some of those lawyers also have a reputation for, I'm going to go to trial and I will win this case, or I will get a hung jury, or I'll do it again, or I'll get a not guilty verdict. Like, your reputation can mean different things. And whether your reputation is that you're like an open book, or whether your reputation is that you're like savvy and you know what you're doing. Your reputation is super important. And we see that all the time with, out of town private attorneys that have no clue what they're doing and the DA just rolls them. I've seen a lot of negotiations with out of town private attorneys who try to show up to court, and the DAs just give them no respect because they have no reputation for anything of any kind. And they just stonewall them. And so I'll be sitting in chambers and you'll see this private attorney try to provide mitigation, try to do the stuff, and the DA will just sit there and stonewall and be like, no.
Well, that out of town attorney, he's not going to trial.
Right. Well, that's their reputation. Their reputation is, hey, if you're an out of town attorney, you're not going to trial. So why would I take any of your threats seriously? And that can be a mistake, because there are some attorneys, especially in certain types of cases, like in DUI cases, I've seen some out of town attorneys that have big reputations in their jurisdiction that will take stuff over here. And maybe the DA is underestimating that. But definitely if you have a reputation of not going to trial, that's something that the DAs definitely think about.
Who was that defense attorney that actually died? That he was a great DA, it was a great DUI DA, PD, a great DUI private attorney, and he actually kicked over the DA's exhibit one time in front of the jury. It was hilarious.
Yeah, allegedly that was Don Bartel. Allegedly. I wasn't there to see that.
That's what I heard. Kicked over the DA's exhibit
on purpose.
Yeah,
I wasn't there.
In his clothes, it was a close, and he actually kicked it over.
Yeah, that's great.
And he got a hang.
But that's that's the type of person. Don Bartel
was pretty legendary.
Was a legend in the DUI space. I mean, he was. He's just, and I've done some. I've sat in on some lectures that he's done and some talks he's given, and I've talked to him actually a couple times. I spoke to him a couple times before he passed, and he knew everything he was doing. Everything he did was intentional. Everything he did was great. And I think someone like that, all it shows up to the DA is always out of town. But if you don't really know that, oh shit, that's Don Bartel, like that guy is going to put up a good fight. That definitely could work against the DA. But yeah, everyone has a reputation as a criminal defense attorney, and it just really is, what is your reputation?
Or as an attorney, like there was a civil attorney, a family law attorney who is just notorious for out of towner but kind of around, and just gouger. I remember, And so,
yeah. And so I try, and so,
everybody's got a
I don't really think too much about what my reputation is with the DAs because I don't think I can really control what my perception is. And I think actually sometimes if you try to control what your perception is, it just comes off worse. It just comes off like you are trying to control your perception.
Well, I think there's a difference between trying to control what people perceive you as and actually being a specific way. Like, I really don't give a shit what they think about me,
Right.
but this is what I try to present. And so, because that way, I think if you're trustworthy, be like, hey, dude, here's this issue.
You have credibility.
And you have credibility down the road because this one DA that I pointed out the battery on the cop and the MVARs and all that, like I pointed all of those facts out. Like the cop said in his report that he touched the hood of the car and it was warm, right? And you
see the video
see clearly in the video that he doesn't do that.
Yeah,
and it's like, and the cop says a number of things that just clearly aren't true. And so you point those facts out because it's like, hey, dude, I pointed these facts out to you. We could go to trial on this, and I could point these out in front of the jury in front of you. Make you look bad, make this cop look bad, or I could point them out now to try to get. And so down the road, when I point out an issue, that DA knows that I'm trustworthy.
And so I think like my reputation, doesn't necessarily have anything to do with how I handle cases, but my reputation, I think, is that I'm a nice person and that I'm not, and in terms of the DA, I'm not going to haggle with them. I am not going to, rake a DA over the coals. I'm going to make my best pitch to them and say, hey, this is what I think it should be. But I'm not going to be the type of lawyer who sits down with the DA in chambers for 30 minutes over 5 days versus 2 days of jail time.
Well, you don't really have that's true. You don't have I've got the time. I don't. Cause I'll have 5 cases and you've got like 100.
Yeah.
So it's, but yeah, 2 days.
But
sure.
That's my thing. It's like, I have seen lawyers get into chambers and spend 20 minutes trying to convince the DA to reduce, and it's when we're saying jail time, really we're talking about is basically community service. It's like, is this person going to do 2 days of community service or are they going to do 5 days of community service?
Yeah,
and
right. And that's your credit. That's your, as an attorney, that's kind of, you're putting yourself out there for some nominal.
And I'm not saying I won't make the pitch. I'll go there and say, hey, can we do 2 days? And if they say no, I'll take that to the client and I'll say, they said no. Like, what would you like to do at this point? We've kind of made our best pitch, but I'm not going to sit there and make the same points over and over and over again. Cause I think that's a little rude to the DAs. And I think that they perceive it that way, that you're just belittling them, that you're just sitting there thinking, that it's really condescending to sit there and be like, no, I'm going to say the same thing I just said and you better change your mind. Right. That's going to give you a poor reputation in that regard. It's going to make it so that they don't want to work with you. And I think, and I'm just naturally, I think I'm naturally a nice person. I try to be nice to people and try to treat people with empathy and respect.
Well, you're also fairly non-confrontational.
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't like confrontation
That's why I became a lawyer.
Right. And whereas like I thrive in confrontation, like, oh, you want to have an argument? Like, let's get adversarial. Let's talk. I'm prepared right now. Let's get to verbal. Let's argue this.
And so it's really interesting because like Aaron and I, so we met in law school. We actually met. That's how we met. It was in like our law school, Modern College of Law had this like
summer
like summer course where it was like one course you take during the summer before the fall semester starts in earnest. And we throughout law school most classes that we had consisted of me and Aaron arguing with each other for at least 30 minutes a night, like at least 30 minutes a night every single night for like 4 years.
Brett usually won those arguments.
I don't think that's true, but but we have very different approaches, and I think being able to talk to Aaron about cases is super helpful because of that reason, because we have different perspectives. So like I'll have.
What was that DV case where the chick got cut in the head? Because remember she's bloody, like it looked like just like a horror movie where they gave you the picture like the night before trial.
It looked like Ric Flair at Clash of the Champions.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that, and I was like, wait a minute, like I thought, if I remember correctly, there was some sort of factual issue, like like the living
But
situation.
I think of it more in cases. I had a case recently. It was a DUI case where I thought there was a great intellectual issue because again, this is a situation where the guy's not found driving; he's found on the side of the road. And there's a question as to what his blood alcohol was at the time of driving, and their expert really doesn't have an answer to that question. But I remember Aaron was just extremely skeptical of this 911 caller. And that was something that I felt was like, I don't really get that. Like, I think this person is just being a little straightforward. And his instinct was like, no, dude, like, no, like she's got some axe to grind. She's got something going on. Something's going on with this 911 caller.
She's coming back from fucking taking her kid to the emergency room. She's been in the emergency room for like 7 hours. And her kid's sick and come back from the hospital. It's like, oh no, I'm going to stop and talk to this weird Mexican dude on some back road. You know, like, no way. Like, why would you do that?
Yeah. And
there's no way.
And I didn't strike in, because I think how I tend to see people, I tend to try to take them at face value because I am a little bit non-confrontational. And I think having that perspective can be helpful because it really helps you see all angles of the case, really.
What advice?
Well, and there was that closed shell station right there too. And it's like, come on, dude. There's all kinds of stuff factually going on with this case. Like, stop thinking about the legal issue and be like, ladies and gentlemen, jury, like, this is a bunch of nonsense. The guy got stuck in the road. What are you gonna do? Your car gets stuck in the road. What are you gonna do?
I'm going to have a drink.
I'm going to walk over to that shell station and get a 12 pack.
Yeah, sure.
Right? Because I'm a big drunk. Right? I mean, it was like that. I love the facts, right? So this is my favorite case I've ever gone to jury trial on. And the guy wanted to go to trial, and I'm like, this case is loser. 0.36 DUI, 911 call. Guy calls in, says this guy just hit my truck, and he's hammered. And the cops show up, and the guy's in his apartment. And he's got blood all over his shirt, And he's so drunk he can't even sit. He can't even stand up to do the field sobriety test. And he's confrontation with the police. And you got a 911 caller saying this guy just hit my car, right? And I love facts. And so wait a minute, hold up. There's an apartment complex, right? Yeah, and it's like 5:00 in the afternoon, right? Yeah, and there's honking horns and a car crash, right? And there's no other people that hear this or see this. Right? And then, wait a minute. Oh, so the 911 caller, wait a minute, hold up. You're on DV probation for hitting your girlfriend? And you drive a big truck. And my client's got blood on his shirt. And the paramedic told the officer, the guy might have been in a 415. Oh, and my client's insulting the cop by saying, officer, is your dick really that small? Because the cop keeps asking him questions. So my client's got kind of a big mouth. And then, there's a picture of this tight little parking space. And his car's parked perfectly in it. And it's like, wait a minute. My client's window's down. And there's a bottle of booze in the car. And it's like, and I'm an alcoholic. And what do? I drink. And what do I like to do? I like to drink alone. And what am I? I'm ashamed of my drinking, right? And so the DA just never saw this coming.
All right.
And it's like, ladies and gentlemen, this guy, and I got the officer to say, have you ever done it? I was like, have you ever done a 0.36 DUI before? Yeah. And did you pull him over? Yeah. And did the guy park good? Park well? Well, actually, he drove onto the pier. Like, okay, so the guy was so drunk, couldn't even park. And that's what I love about facts, right? And I was like holding up this picture to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, this guy's so drunk, he can't even stand up to do the field sobriety test. I got body camera in of him just sitting down when they were asking him to do the field sobriety test. And I put my client on the stand.
He had no priors?
No prior. No, he did have I think he did have a prior. That's inadmissible.
Sure.
Impermissible character evidence. Sir, are you an alcoholic? Yes. What were you doing? I was drinking. Where were you drinking? I was drinking in my car. Why were you drinking? Because I'm ashamed. Who was in your apartment? My girlfriend. How long have you been in a relationship with her? Not very long, couple of weeks. Did you not want, why didn't you want to see the kids? I'm embarrassed. Where were you? I was in my car. Were you driving? No. What happened? Honestly, I really don't remember. But I know I wasn't driving. I know I was sitting there drinking. I was just sitting there drinking because I didn't want to drink in my apartment. Right? And the jury came back not guilty. And I know that DA walked back to his office with his head hung down
Yeah.
And the officer's like, wait a minute, you just had a .36 DUI with a 911 caller and it wasn't even hung. It was not guilty. And that is what, and I think you pull a couple of those tricks out and, I don't know if that DA is not there anymore, but I don't know if that story still isn't being, God only knows what's going on. But, that's what's so fun about looking at a case. That's how Brett and I look at things differently, right? Like, I don't know, maybe Brett would have been like, well, wait a minute, what's the legal issues here? And it's like, legal issues? Dude, you got a guy on probation who just punched somebody in the face and now better get to the phone and call police, come up with some cockamamie story because he might get arrested, right? And I crossed that 911 call. Dude, you're on probation, right? Yeah, because you actually punched your girlfriend, right? That's in front of the jury. So you got kind of an attitude problem, don't you? You got a bit of a temper, don't you? Yeah.
What do you say?
Did the temper come out?
No, I don't know.
He probably said no, but no, I don't really have a temper. Actually, she was just making it up.
Yeah, she's all lying.
She was asking for it.
So that's what's fun about, talking stuff off Brett, because it's like, I can come up with, because I'm a criminal. And so I'm used to being in situations where, let's figure out how I got here, like how this person got here. And that's it's a different viewpoint than what are the legal issues. And that's why I like, that's how Brett and I talk stuff out.
What advice would you guys give to someone who wants to become a lawyer or who just started law school?
My gut instinct is to say don't, but I'm just kidding.
That's what Don Landis said. He said, don't do it.
I think my biggest piece of advice would be to go work at a law office that does the type of law you want to do or you think you want to do, because I think you'll find out pretty quickly that it's not what you think it is. I mean, when you go to law school, they don't tell you anything about what it's like to practice law. They don't tell you anything about what it's like to actually be a lawyer. Law school is all theoretical. It's basically and the bar exam is basically a check on whether you have certain cognitive function and whether you have certain abilities to reason. But other than that, it doesn't tell you anything about what it's like to be a lawyer. And I think there are a lot of lawyers. I think lawyers have a bad reputation because there are a lot of lawyers who are unhappy with what they do because it's not interesting to them. Because they're, at the end of the day, what they're doing is they're fighting, especially in the case of a lot of civil attorneys, they're fighting some battle that they don't really have their heart in.
Some land use thing with a blighted piece of property, and they're going to be stuck in it for 5 or 6 years.
And they've probably told their client from the outset, you should come to a settlement with these people. We should try to come to an agreement. And they go, no, there's no way I'm agreeing with this motherfucker over here. I'm not doing that. This person, is nasty, and I don't want to do any work with them. And imagine being a lawyer in that situation. For me, and so I think if you're in law school or you're thinking of becoming a lawyer, go try to find a job, whether it's a secretary, a paralegal, any type of job you can get in a firm that does the type of law you think you want to do, so you can see what it would be like to be the lawyer. The other thing is that lawyers love to talk, and lawyers love to talk about themselves. I mean, not to get too meta, but kind of
Sure.
what we're doing here a little bit. And they'll talk to you. They will talk to you. If there's a lawyer who you think, hey, I want to have that person's job, find their email address in the bar and be like, hey, I want to talk to you about what you do. They'll talk to you. Love to talk.
That's how I got my intern who I have now.
Yes.
Just cold emailed me. Now they go into court.
Absolutely.
See what it's really like.
Absolutely, because lawyers love to talk and like to talk about what they do. But from a practical standpoint, I would say the most important thing about being a lawyer, especially if you are a young lawyer, if you've just passed the bar and you're going to be a lawyer, you got to be true to yourself. You have to be you. And whatever that means, be you. Because if you try to be somebody else, you will fail and you will be unhappy.
Advice to somebody that was going to thinking about becoming a lawyer. So I think that there were things about law school that I loved. I never went to college. I have a high school degree and I have a Juris Doctorate in law. I took a few classes at MPC, but I don't have an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree. I'm unique in that respect. There was a way that I got into law school. I don't know if you know if that route is even still, you can still do it, but they used to have special student exemption. I really loved law school from the standpoint that we went at night. Like I worked, I caddied during the day, and like I actually read the cases, right? And I loved to read. I used to read a lot. Growing up as a kid, I was actually an avid reader. And so that's how I got my education, was through reading a lot of different types of material. And so I liked that. I knew that I actually hated being a lawyer. The first year when I was doing a legal research project where we had to write a paper off of design immunity. And I'm like, this is a fucking nightmare. Pardon my French. This is a nightmare. Like, why? I was not a great student. I never liked homework. Why am I doing this? And I knew at that point, I was like, this probably is the wrong thing for me, but I'm stubborn. I did it anyway. And I found an area of the criminal law, area of the law where, and I got lucky and I passed the bar. Both Brett and I, we went to San Diego. We both took the bar. We passed the bar the first time. I probably wouldn't have taken it again if I didn't pass the bar, you know? But the law is hard. And so going into law and being a lawyer is what I tell people that want to do this, is that there's a lot of alcoholism. There's a lot of drug addiction. There's a lot, like being a lawyer, especially for high powered law, it's really stressful and it's really hard. And it's also like I said, I paid $1,000 a month towards my student loans for the last 10 years and I paid them off. Right. But I also passed the bar and I was able to earn, and I sacrifice. I don't go to Hawaii. I don't go on vacations. I don't get I'm pretty frugal. What I would say is that you really got to want it. It's like anything else, man. It's a career that's really hard and it's rewarding and it really sucks a lot of the time because you're dealing with other lawyers who might be a lawyer for a different reason than you are. Right? There's a lot of lawyers out there that just want to make a lot of money and they really don't care how they do it. They don't, I don't really think they care about their clients or justice or anything. They're just billing a rate. And so you got to realize that that's who you're going to run into, right? I had a lawyer that was going to ask for $10,000 in attorney's fees on a domestic violence restraining order when her client called to get a DV restraining order because my client threw a pair of socks at her. And I laughed at her. And I said, I want to hear you ask the commissioner for $10,000 in attorney's fees. I actually want to have this hearing just so you can ask for that. But my client is willing to engage in an agreement outside of the hearing. And she agreed.
Yeah.
But being a lawyer, I would say if there are parts of me that wish that I had learned to trade. There's a part of me that wishes I had gone to, my dad was a builder. I wish I'd gone into construction. The world needs plumbers and electricians and trade skill people more than it needs lawyers. And you might find that might be a lot more satisfying. But it is equally satisfying when you have a client and I had a young African-American kid who was charged with domestic violence and witness intimidation and child cruelty. And that case was so fucking stupid. And that jury came back not guilty in less than a half an hour. And he stood up and we hugged and his mom was crying. And it's like, that is rewarding and on a whole nother level. I was present when a guy got a parole. I do parole hearings for lifers. And this guy had been in prison for 35 years and he was a vet. And I'd like to think that I helped structure his parole argument. And I'd like to think that I helped get him in contact with the VTC in here in Monterey, that I had an impact on his parole hearing. He was granted parole. That guy started crying. He reminded me of my father, who's a Vietnam vet. And it was very rewarding. So being a lawyer sucks, like for me, like solid 80% of the time, maybe 85% of the time. But that 15% really is a God shot where I actually feel like I'm doing what my higher power actually wanted.
See, mine's a little bit in the other direction where 15% of the time it sucks. Then 85% of the time I absolutely love it. And I'm reminded of a time when I was in law school, my first year legal research and writing. We had to write a paper, no more than 5 pages, but you had to cover X number of issues. So the idea there is that you have to fit it all in and cover all the issues in a confined space. And there are local rules and I messed up on the local rules. I used the wrong size margins. and I sent it to my professor as a Word doc. She adjusted the margins, made them larger, which put my paper over length. So I got docked 15% for having the wrong margins and an additional 15% for having over length. So I started off with 70%. My first paper, my first grade in all of law school was a D. And I was like, you know what, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe it's not for me. But then after that, I had this epiphany. I said, this is arbitrary nonsense. And I was talking to someone about that. There was a mentor at my school and he said, you know what, the law is a little bit arbitrary. And if you can live in this environment of arbitrary nonsense and do well in it, then you'll do well as an attorney. And that kind of, the light bulb went on above my head. And after that, to the credit of my professor, my papers were never over length. They were never had the wrong margins after that again. It was just a lesson. I think I got a C+ in that class. It was my lowest grade. But
is that like the legal research class?
It was legal research and writing. Yeah. But that was a kick in the teeth. I almost thought I was going to have to drop out of school. I thought I'm not coming back.
Well, that sparks. So one thing I would say is if you want to become a public defender, if you think you want to become a public defender, you probably do. Right? If you hear about what we do and that's something that you think you would want to do, you probably do want to do it. And I would encourage you to try it. If you're a new public defender or you're thinking about becoming a public defender, it is extremely discouraging.
Or even a DA, because actually we need good DAs too.
So if you want to become a public defender, or you want to become a criminal defense attorney, just know the system is designed against you, and it's going to be very frustrating over and over again. But what you can do in every case is you can show your client empathy, and you can be there for your client. And I have had clients who have had terrible results because of the facts of the case, because of the situation that they're in, and when they got a terrible result and they looked at me and they said, thank you, and they gave me a hug, that meant more than the clients who I got found not guilty, because the idea is you can still help somebody, even if you can't get the right outcome, even if you can't get the best outcome, being empathetic, being supportive of them is the reward.
And that is maybe justice being served.
Could be
right?
Depending on what on the situation, but yeah,
because that's what interests me is I want to see justice served, and there's a lot of different ways that looks like, and it's not always a not guilty. Sometimes it's let's do this X, Y, and Z,
right?
And that way my client, because ultimately what's the best thing for my client? Best thing for my client is to heal and not do what not find them in this position again, right? Because we all have a part. And part of my job too in helping clients is like, what's your part? Why are you here? There's a reason why you're here. And like I had this client, she was, this was back when I was a public defender, and she was charged with possession of methamphetamine. And she's like, it wasn't mine. It was in a purse. It was in the back seat. I was like, I'm like, okay. And I'm like, well, I see you've been charged 2 other times with possession of methamphetamine. She's like, yeah. She's like, I don't use those. That wasn't mine. I was like, okay, I hear you. I hear that's not yours. I go, do you know how many times I've been convicted of drunk driving? She's like, no. And I was like, 4. Do you know how many times I've been convicted of being drunk in public? No. Twice. Do you know how many times I've been convicted of possession of marijuana? No. 3 times. Do you know why? She's like, no. Like, because I drive drunk, I'd like to drink, and I like to smoke weed. Now, I'm not saying, and I go, do you know how many times I've been busted for possession of meth? She goes, no. And I go, 0. Do you know why? She goes, no. I go, because I don't use meth. Now, I'm not saying that you use meth, but part of that is like, how can I help my client? Like, how can I help them? And, there's a lot of different ways to do that.
It's hard when the client's in total denial and they have no accountability.
Or maybe she doesn't use meth, but also it's like, okay, so if you, and I'm not saying you use meth, is what I told her. I was like, but if you keep finding yourself in a position where you keep getting caught with meth, you need to start looking at why you keep getting caught with meth. You need to address that. And so that's how I think part of what Brett's even talking about is like being empathetic with your client and also helping clients see like, why are you here? Because you don't want to be here again. I don't want to see you here again.
Yeah. I have a client right now who real young kid, real bright young kid, just does so much. He does a lot of volunteer work. He's in school, wants to become an EMT, wants to do all this stuff, picks up a case, and then during the proceeding of the case picks up a couple other cases for like driving on a suspended license or something. And there, all the cases he has, they're real ticky-tack. There's a lot of the cases or a couple of the cases where the police are behaving really badly to him and are showing him a lot of disrespect and are treating him like he's a hoodlum and all this shit. And it's tough because sometimes you have to look at that client and like I had a conversation with this guy and I was like, you have to help yourself because they're not helping you. Like the police are not going to help you. And so you need to help yourself. And what that means is that maybe you have to, not drive. I understand, this suspended license is, bogus because the reason for the suspension is bogus, but that's the reality that you're in right now. And I'm going to tell you, like, if you're caught driving, like you will find yourself in jail at some point. And I don't want to see that happen to you. And those are some of the tougher situations where that your client is being picked on in some regard. And yes, maybe they're not following the law exactly, but there's, before recording, we were talking about maybe some judicial officers who don't always follow the law. And
or DAs who don't always follow the law.
DAs don't always follow the law. And the reality is like, well, or law enforcement who maybe doesn't always follow the law.
Right.
And but if your client is the one getting picked on, it is hard to have that conversation and be like, look, I know you're not a bad person. But I need you to help yourself. I need you to get out of your own way.
What advice would you give to yourself when you were 18?
Invest in Bitcoin.
Was Bitcoin around when you were 18? I'm not going to ask you how old you are, but
no.
Invest in Yahoo.
Invest in Amazon. I remember I was at a party one time on the Truckee River back in like 96, and this guy I was hammered, so drunk, like had to sleep in my truck to do like kind of a rally puke, kind of like get myself back. But anyway, he kept telling me about how he wanted to like invent a program where you could buy stuff on your computer. And I was like, nobody's going to do that. Like, why would you buy something on your computer? Like, who would do that? No, man, you're not. And the guy'd be like, he was like trying so enthusiastic about it. It was probably Jeff Bezos or somebody like that. Who knows? But he's like, no, man, you got like, think about it. You could be sitting on your computer and you could like buy stuff on your computer and just show up at your door. And I was like, nobody's going to do that. So I don't know. That invest in that. If I was 18, I don't know.
I think sometimes this question is hard, especially like, and I don't know what's going on through Aaron's mind, but one of the things is like, it's easy to give yourself advice, but then that means that your life is going to turn out different than it is right now. And so it's like, if you think that you're at the right spot right now, then kind of why change it?
Yeah, right? Even my mistakes brought me to where I am today. And I don't have a problem with where I am today.
Yeah.
Well, and so you mentioned something. I said like 85% of the time being a lawyer sucks, and like 15%, it's great. Now I've been a lawyer since 2017. Let me rephrase that. We passed the February 2017 bar. We got our bar license we got our results in June. I actually took me a little bit longer to actually get through it because of some other trailing stuff. But I've only really had my bar card since 2017. I've known you since probably 2007.
Yeah, I'd say 2007, 2008.
Maybe 2000, even 2000. Yeah. In fact, I saw an old friend, Amanda, walking down the street the other day.
Sure.
And so you've been a lawyer since then.
Since dinosaurs.
You're pretty old. Even though I'm still older than you, probably.
Yeah.
And both Brett, you're 33.
I'm basically 40.
You'll be what, 34 at the end of this month?
Yeah.
Yeah. And how old are you?
45.
Okay. I'm 47. I'll be 48. So, I'm a little bit older. So if I don't know, being a lawyer, I like where I'm at right now, but where I was going with this was that maybe when in like another 15 years, I will like being a lawyer 85% of the time because I will have acclimated to the idiocy and the arbitrariness of what we see. Like, because I have a hard time with authority. Like I became a lawyer too because I hate authority. And there's a judge who I love. He's a great guy. Rumor has it he has never granted a motion to suppress it as a misdemeanor judge.
Yeah.
All right.
I've got one in front of that judge coming up.
You will not, I think, and this is why I generally try to litigate stuff and why I try to resolve stuff, because the reality of it is that the judges at the misdemeanor level really aren't, I think they want to be fair. All right. And I think that they are smarter, and I know they're smarter than me. But I really think that, and especially like when you're, and even if you're dealing with like infractions and certain things, like you're not going to get really the legal issue. I don't care how intellectual you are. Like, and actually that's not true, because I've seen Brett win a number of motion to suppress hearings. But I remember there was a PD that was arguing a motion to suppress evidence issue in front of a judge that's no longer there. And her ruling was just plain up wrong. And it had to do with failure to use a turn signal. And the cops said they pulled him over because he didn't use a turn signal. And that was not a legitimate, lawful stop. And the judge ruled against him, and the guy ended up pleading out. You are not, I think, a lot of the times going to get the best rulings at the trial level, at the misdemeanor end of infraction level. And so you have to be prepared to deal with that arbitrariness or appeal it. And a lot of most of my clients aren't going to appeal stuff to the appellate court. So that can be challenging. And I'm not exactly sure where I was going with this. Just like, enjoying the law and enjoy being a lawyer, even though I have to live in this arbitrary universe. And perhaps my enjoyment of that arbitrary universe will go up the longer I do this, because I will become more desensitized to that sort of outcome.
So I had a rough start. Back when we first met, I was scrambling to get things going, and I would take appearances. I'd do any kind of work that would come my way. And I actually did some evictions. I did a commercial eviction on a storage place in Sand City. It was do-it-yourself storage. And I worked for a bank, and I kicked out this owner who was stealing from the business. The bank manager, the account manager called and said, "Do you know anyone who can manage a self-storage place?" And I was practicing law out of my living room. So for over a year, I practiced law as the manager of a self-storage place. And it was a great job because people would just drop off payments. Every once in a while, I'd have to show a unit. But in there, I could use the phone, I could use the computer, and I just did what I had to do. I couldn't afford an office, but someone was paying me $25 an hour to run a small business. So I did that, and that was just my way of getting it going. And if you had asked me then, what do you think of this? Is this lucrative? Is this working for you? I'd be like, yeah, I'm trying. But now, over 10 years later, it's obviously a different perspective that I have. But sometimes early on, it's a bumpy road. It's a really bumpy road.
Well, and that's part of how I became a public defender too was seeing Aaron go through it, because like I said, we've been friends since law school, and even after law school, we stayed in touch pretty regularly.
I even told you to apply with Crawford.
I already had applied.
Had you?
Yeah.
I thought I was definitely pushing you to go apply over there.
But to get back to like what would I tell my younger self? I think a lot of what I would tell my younger self is like, don't convince yourself that you can't do it, because I think I didn't take a lot of chances when I was younger because of the perception that I couldn't do it. And I think some of the things that I did that were the most rewarding were things where I just went for it, because I thought I wanted to do it and I went for it. And to me, that was that's something I would tell my younger self is just don't tell yourself you can't do it.
I would have told myself, don't be such a big drunk and get into recovery sooner.
And your younger self would have told you to fuck off.
Right. I saw actually somebody post something the other day. I think it was a court clerk actually that I am following on social media is great. She said, even if I went back to when I was younger, it was something along the lines of if I could go back to when I was young, I wouldn't belong there anyway.
Yeah.
And I was like, that like if I could go back and knowing that now, then what I know now, I wouldn't belong there. I thought that was really interesting because in some ways that's true. But it's like I had friends that were because I grew up in Lake Tahoe and I was just a snowboard bum and derelict. And I had some friends that were normies and they're like all of a sudden they're going to fire academy and becoming paramedics. And now 25 years later, they're all firemen and and they're all, they've been professionals forever. And it's like, I feel like I'm, in some ways I'm like, just like basically starting from the ground up. Like I'm in the same position as my 33-year-old counterpart is, and I'm almost 50. Like if he's 33 and he's almost 40, I'm almost 60. And I've got a 5-year-old.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that you're almost 60. You're not old. You're young.
Yeah,
You're young and spry.
The body of an 18-year-old.
No. I've got
the mind of a child.
I've got the body of a 70-year-old.
Yeah.
Got the heart of a puppy.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. I don't foresee that you will ever lose your fight or your angst. I mean, that's like part of you. That's like you like to fight. And I think that's, part of your appeal. It's like if you think something's right, like you're gonna say it, and that's not a bad thing. That's helped.
I read something one time that said, say it even if it makes your voice shake.
Yep.
I like that.
Yeah.
What do you guys think? You want to wrap it up?
Sure.
We're not going to talk about the Trump assassination and how this is all a direct result of the Democrat rhetoric over the last 4 years, combined with gaslighting and a ridiculous Supreme Court decision that came out dissent.
I wish we could stop the mass media gaslighting that we're dealing with. That's insane. That's insane. I'd talk about that all day. I have my thoughts on it.
Talk about the nonsense New York cases in a favorable jurisdiction to get a specific outcome.
Sure. I mean, I'm so beyond politics. My thoughts on politics are that there's conservatives and then there's liberals.
And then there's the rest of us just trying to get along.
The United States is a rotting corpse, get eaten by bugs.
Well, even the Roman Empire fell.
Yeah, I mean, but hear me out. I think the United States is a rotting corpse getting consumed by bugs. And conservatives are rooting for the corpse and liberals are rooting for the bugs. So.
Ooh, I like that.
And on that, thanks for watching. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, I hope that was